Hey guys, I just want to bring up an opportunity for resource investors. If you want to rub elbows with the big wigs and talk to companies directly that are handpicked by Rick Rule, well, you got to be in Boca Raton from July 7th to 11th for the Rick Rule Symposium. The event has become a premier event in the mining space, and they're going to have some pretty big speakers like Robert Friedland, Sean Rusin, and the great Rick Rule. And also, we're going to be there. You can meet the Deep Dive team in person. So if you're interested in rubbing elbow with some of the biggest heavy hitters in junior mining, check out the link below. Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm chatting with Dan Dickson from Endeavour Silver. In this interview, we discuss the newly elected president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, as well as where Dan thinks that the silver market could be heading and how he uses his assessment of the volatility in silver to make decisions for a company that's got two production assets and one that is slated to hit production this year. We also get into what the capital raising environment is like for silver producers in the Canadian junior markets, as well as what investors can expect in 2024 from Endeavour Silver. All right, everybody, enjoy the interview. Dan, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
So the big news right now out of Mexico is that a new president was elected, the first female in Mexican history, Claudia Sheinbaum. What are your thoughts right now of what this means for the mining sector in Mexico?
Yeah, I mean, it was widely expected she was well ahead in the polls. Maybe a little disappointed that at the end of the day, it's record numbers for her. She actually outperformed AMLO 6 years ago. They got close to a majority in Congress, and I think it means a little bit more of the same. I think there's been a lot of rhetoric over the last 6 years in Mexico from AMLO with regards to mining and ultimately open pit mining, which is positive for us in the fact that we're only underground vein mining, and that's what we focus on. But I think overall for the industry, it's not particularly strong. Now, they put through some mining reforms about a year and a half, 2 years ago, and those have been challenged through the courts, and ultimately a lot of mining companies have won that just because how they passed the legislation through the House, and so we'll see some changes to those mining reforms or new updated mining reforms come through. The other discussions people have had with Claudia and her people is that she is more pro-business than AMLO was. She has said that she'll let the science dictate it, so we're always optimistic. I think, like I say, worst case scenario, it's more of the same. We've got permits over the last couple of years. I know some other groups have, and I know some groups it's really slowed down on. So hopefully that's kind of where we get some certainty of timelines and expectations of the government. But again, more of the same of what we've seen over the last 6 years. Mexico is still one of the better jurisdictions, even under AMLO's regime, and it's going to continue with his party, the Moreno Party, taking office again for another 6 years.
So let's talk about silver. We've recently had some traction. I know at the time we're speaking today, it's been down a little bit today, but for the most part, 2024 has been very kind to the silver bulls. What's your read right now on where the silver market's at today and where it could be heading?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. And the 2024 has been very good. I mean, we came out of a pretty tough 2023 and silver jumped from 22 up to 32. I know today we're kind of in the 30 range, maybe even slightly below, but it's been a very good start to the year, and I think it's setting up to be extremely strong for the next couple of years. And I'm not just saying that as a CEO of a silver company, and I'm always pretty realistic about what's happening in our space. And I think the biggest thing that we've seen in the silver space is it's the structural deficits over the last 3 to 4 years, and really the growth in demand from a solar standpoint and industrial use. And silver's got kind of two aspects to it. One's the industrial use, the other side's the monetary aspects. And we've seen gold make up new all-time highs, getting above 2,400, again, coming off that a little bit, but still sitting at a great price of 2,300 and above. Silver hasn't made all-time highs. It's sitting, like I say, 32 all-time highs, being close to 50, having hit 50 intraday. And I think that's yet to come. I think what's been driving silver is the demand side of things and the industrial component. 15 years ago, when we saw those previous highs, the industrial component was about 300 to 350 million of 800 million ounces that we produce. Today, the industrial component's about 500 to 500 million ounces with the same supply. So ultimately, we still produce about 800 million ounces of silver per year coming out of mines, whether it's as a byproduct or a primary silver mine like ours. So that juice, when the monetary story comes back, instead of being 500 million ounces available for investment, now we're talking about 300 or 250 to 300 million ounces. And I think when the monetary story comes back in silver, which maybe it's starting to now, there's a lot of juice there for silver. And I think we'll ultimately see that all-time high be broken, which is the normal ebbs and flows or cycles in the commodity space. But we'll see. Well, hopefully we'll get well past that. And I see that happening now. It takes time. No one can ever predict that timeline. But I think 2024 is going to be a very strong year for silver and continue to grow or to continue to appreciate anyway.
So it's the first time we've had you on. We're excited to have you here as price of silver is doing well. And we know that our audience loves a good silver story, especially with a company who's producing. So maybe if you don't mind just giving us a quick high level overview of Endeavour Silver, sort of what the company owns and where it's going.
Yeah, I mean, glad they love a good story. I think right now Endeavour is a really good story in our space. I mean, we built the company off our NYSE and Bolañitos assets. They're operating. We've been there 18 years and 17 years respectively. I like to say they're mature assets, which might be a kind way to say they're higher cost assets. A lot of people have played in the Endeavour story because of the leverage. Our all-in sustaining cost this year is expected to be between $22 and $23. So when we started the year at $23 silver, we weren't making a lot of after-tax cash flow. I mean, effectively, we're break even. That's changed considerably over the last 3 months. But what we've been out trying to tell the story about our company is our Terronera project. So we announced in 2023 the construction of the Terronera project. It's also in Mexico. It's a thermal vein system, just like what we do at NYSE and Bolañitos, where we produce. Currently in 2024, we're going to produce about 9 million silver equivalent ounces. We say Terronera is going to double our production and cut our cost profile in half. So Terronera in the first 4 years of life will produce about 7 million ounce silver equivalent. But what's so special about Terronera is its cost profile. All the gold that we produce at Terronera will pay for the silver. So it's all in sustaining costs on a byproduct basis is effectively zero. And that's why we say it's going to cut our cost profile in half. So we're at an inflection point. Terronera is supposed to come online in Q4 of this year, so Q4 2024, and ultimately completely reshape the company and the company's cash flows and put us on a phenomenal base with phenomenal growth behind that potentially.
So in your marketing materials, you guys refer to yourselves as a mid-tier producer. For our retail listeners, what exactly does that mean? Is that typically based on sort of the number of ounces that you guys are producing a year?
Yeah, it's based on the number of ounces. It's subjective. Our goal is to be a senior silver producer. We think to be a senior silver producer, you got to produce about 25 million ounces of silver. From a primary silver standpoint, it's a very small space. There's about you can count on both hands how many primary silver companies there are in the world that have any significance. Of the 800 million ounces of silver that we produce annually, 30% to 35% of that comes from primary silver mines. So in our world, there's the Pan American Silver, there's Fresnillo. Those would be our two largest silver producing companies. And then you've got the First Majestics of the world, maybe Fortuna Silver. And then below that, kind of get into the mid-tier space. And whether that's 5 million ounces of silver, 10 million ounces of silver, 15 million ounces of silver, it's just kind of a subjective point. And we've always kind of classified ourselves as kind of a mid-tier behind the large guys above the junior space.
So you guys are primarily focused on Mexico right now. Do you guys ever have any conversations about looking at M&A opportunities outside of Mexico?
Yeah, you're right. We are mainly focused on Mexico. That's where our competitive advantage is. We have almost 1,800 people under employment in Mexico. We actually do have properties up in Nevada. There's some assets we picked up a couple of years ago. They were distressed in a junior company where 300,000 ounces of gold was defined and 13 million ounces of silver. We picked that up for $10 million. Unfortunately, we haven't advanced that just because of some other properties, obviously building the Terronera project. And we also picked up an asset in Mexico called Pitarrilla in 2022 for $70 million that we're very high on. We're really pushing that. We're moving our resources towards Pitarrilla. And then we're also been in Chile actually for the last kind of 8-9 years, picked up projects over the years. Some we've given back or handed back. But right now we have about 4 to 5 different exploration projects that we're slowly advancing more from a grassroots standpoint. So we're not opposed to leaving Mexico. It's just that we have so many things going on well in Mexico that we're probably allocating more resources there than anywhere else.
I've only been investing in mining for maybe 5 years or so. Are silver mines easier to get into production than most of your other commodities?
Yes and no. I mean, it's got positives and negatives with regards to primary silver mines. I mean, they're typically smaller in scale and they're all typically underground. There's just fewer of them. Silver, as I say, is generally a byproduct. 70% of the world production comes from copper mines or gold mines, lead zinc mines. So where silver is the primary revenue mix, they're just harder to discover and they're smaller deposits, and ultimately makes that more difficult to bring them online. Once you make that discovery, perhaps because of the scale of those deposits and scale of the operations, they're easier to bring online. But it's not easy to bring any mine online in any jurisdiction of the world. It takes time, it takes persistence, and ultimately capital. And we're very excited with Terronera coming online. It seems like it's coming online at the right time in the silver space.
So you mentioned raising capital. What's the capital raising environment like for you guys right now? Like, I assume that whether the times are good, the times are bad, you've got bankers constantly calling you guys up. You guys are a producer. Yep. Everybody's looking to clip fees. Has the conversation changed much as we saw silver approach $30?
Oh, yeah. I would say over the last 3 months, there's been a lot more inbound calls, not just from the bankers, but ultimately investors. Historically, Endeavour Silver, we've been held mostly by retail. Our valuations in the US space, there's a silver bug, so to speak, that are always interested in silver stories, and institutional interest wanes depending on that price. And I'd say as we came out of the doldrums of 2023 and into 2024, institutional involvement and institutional inbound calls have increased significantly. As far as capital, I mean, we've been fully financed on our Terronera project since we announced construction. We've had a pathway. Some of it's through equity, some of it's through debt. So we're borrowing for the first time in Endeavour's last 10 years. We're borrowing money to build the Terronera project. So we put a project financing facility in place for $120 million. So we didn't have to completely dilute our shareholders. People are trying to get into the story, and that's reflective in our share price over the last 3 months. I mean, we've outperformed significantly, and I think they say if that's going to continue once we get into commercial production or ultimately commissioning in Q4 and then commercial production for 2025 at Terronera, I think more names will come into our story and people will be asking to put capital to work, and we just need a spot to put that capital. But right now, like I say, we're fully financed, so mostly everybody's buying on the secondary markets.
What's the mine life like for the two producing assets? And then we got Terronera, which is coming online this year. What can you tell us about the mine life?
Yeah, so Guanaceví, we've been there 18 years. We've never had more than a 2-year reserve life. And that's the kind of a characteristic of an epithermal vein system. So ultimately, as we mine, we replace those reserves with resources as we develop. So we convert that confidence from kind of an indicated level to a probable level. And then we continue to go down, almost like beads on a necklace, go to the next bead, and we convert what was potential or no resources into resources. And so we've always replaced what we've mined with by the end of the year with either drilling or mine development. And that's going to continue. And we have 2 years of reserve life at Guanaceví, and we expect to be there 5 to 7 more years. At Bolañitos, we've been there 17 years, never had more than 2-year reserve life. We expect to be there, maybe not as long as necessarily Guanaceví. We have good runway for 3 to 4 years, but there's exploration opportunity at both those operations to continue to add mine life over the time. Terronera is different for us because we have a 10-year reserve life immediately, and obviously we had to do that much drilling underground to make the investment decision of $270 million. Ultimately, at Guanaceví or Bolañitos, we could have increased reserve life as we've gone, but it's just a cost-benefit analysis of drilling from surface. You can only drill to a certain depth. So once you're underground, you can extend that life, and we'll do that at Terronera. We expect to be at Terronera 15, 20 years, 25 years before it's all said and done. We have about 50 or 20,000 hectares. We've identified over 50 different veins. We drilled out some of those veins in 2021, but at this point, we're extending mine life, not trying to grow the asset. So we expect some of those veins. We'll start drilling that. We'll start drilling the Terronera vein, which is 90% of our resources at that project, which is open along strike and open to depth. Once we get into operation, we'll start investing again from an exploration standpoint and extend mine life at Terronera.
What does your guys' process look like for deciding what you guys want to take on from an exploration standpoint? I mean, we often talk to companies that have those sort of sub $100 million market caps. And for them, sometimes a project almost has to fall into their lap in order to move forward with something because their cost of capital is so expensive. You guys are $1 billion company. You guys can raise money. You guys also have shares that trade. So that's a lot more attractive than your typical, Canadian junior mining stock. How do you guys evaluate what you want to move forward with from an exploration standpoint?
Yeah, it's two things. We want to stay a silver company, right? So we're looking for predominantly revenue mix in silver. It's got to be of a certain scale, which has changed over the years. As now we're going into becoming a 15 million ounce producer, looking at assets that can bring in 2 million ounces of silver mean less, right? It's putting a lot of management time into that. Location's obviously key. It's funny. I mean, all the projects are so specific to their projects that there's a number of factors that go in for different things. And scale, silver, Latin America, we want to stay in the Americas, just try to stay in one time zone just from a management standpoint. And then obviously grade. Will it actually end up being a mine? You get in the exploration world, there's things that you don't know will be a mine or not be a mine. We're trying to evaluate projects where we can go take them from either a brownfield situation or well-advanced exploration. Can you put them into scoping studies and ultimately build it? We're trying to grow from a production standpoint, and as I say, get into a senior silver position. So we want assets that we think can be a mine of a relative scale. So now that means maybe 4 million ounces of silver with some byproduct that gets us there, but there's no perfect map of what we're looking for just because they're so hard to find that we look at a lot of things. It's just, what do we move on? You're right. Right now, we're in a great position to make some of those decisions, but it's also about resource allocation internally, right? We only have so much from a labor standpoint of exploration expertise that can be assigned and put out, and even from a capital standpoint. And in 2024, a lot of our capital, we're spending, close to $170, $180 million this year with regards to the Terronera project. And we want to make sure we have all that capital and we complete that and get it into production. Next year, when we're really pumping out the cash flow, maybe we allocate more resources to exploration, but it still comes down to people that know what they're doing and what they're looking for. And it's a very specific skill set for an exploration geologist that's good at what they do. And we think we have a phenomenal team. We can bring some of those people in and culture, but that takes time. It takes the right projects. It takes the right systems and things that we understand. So it's not as easy as just scaling up. We've got to do it in a smart fashion that we slowly add value to those projects. And ultimately, like I say, I'll try to find things that will come into production one day.
So Dan, last question for you, and you've been generous with your time today. If I'm an investor watching, and we sort of touched on some of this earlier in the interview, but if I just want to evaluate the company and management, and I'm just trying to follow the story, whether I'm a potential investor or current investor, what am I looking out for in 2024?
Yeah, the biggest thing that all investors are looking for, whether you're in the story or not in the story, is the commissioning of Terronera for Q4. So that's a big inflection point for the company. Are we going to come in on time? Or are we going to come in on budget? So the build cost of $271 million, we're still on track to hit that. We're on track for commissioning for Q4. I think that's the biggest inflection point this year. And when we hit that, you'll see a re-rating on our stock, or we expect a re-rating on our stock. Operations wise, we've hit guidance the last handful of years from a production standpoint. We expect to do that again. We had a very good Q1, right in line with the upper range of our guidance for 2024. So like I say, I think really everybody's looking at the Terronera project and ensuring that we hit our timelines that we're explaining to everybody. And like I say, we're halfway through 2024 and we remain on that schedule. So it's about productivity. We're not waiting on any equipment. We're not waiting any bulk materials. It's just about executing in the vertical build that's been going relatively well for the last 6 months. So it's Q4 will be an important quarter for us.
Well, Dan, thanks very much for hopping on here today. we'll be watching as Terronera comes online this year. And hopefully once we get this up and running, you'll come back on here and update us on how the operation's going.
No, happy to come back on. Appreciate you having me today.
Thanks, Dan. All right, everybody. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this interview, please smash that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Also, let me know what you think in the comment section. Thanks, everyone.